Shalom and welcome back to the Messiah Yeshua. I'm glad that you're here to learn the Word of God with us. Today we're diving into this week's portion, which is called Shemini. We'll explore its wisdom, its beauty, and we'll see how it speaks to our lives right now. Together we'll look at passages from Leviticus 9:1 through 11:47, which will connect us to 2 Samuel 6:1 through 7:17, as well as Matthew 3:11 through 17. And we'll start with a Torah portion summary. On the 8th day, following their 7 days of inauguration, Aaron and his sons begin to officiate as priests. They offer up sin offering, burnt offerings, peace offerings, and bread offerings on their own behalf and more sacrifices on the behalf of the assembly of Israel. Aaron lifts his hands and blesses the assembly. He and Moses enter the sanctuary, emerge, and bless the people. Fire shoots out from within the sanctuary and consumes the sacrifices on the altar. The children of Israel prostrate themselves before the presence of God. The spiritual ecstasy and joy turn to shock and dismay when Aaron's two elder sons, Nadab and Abihu, offer incense contrary to the command of God. Fire consumes them. Protocol requires Aaron and his remaining sons to forego expressions of mourning while conducting the worship services. They nevertheless refuse to eat the goat of the sin offering. Aaron explains that his sorrow of heart makes it inappropriate to eat the sin offering. God gives the surviving priests laws about conducting the services, including a prohibition on alcohol while serving in the tabernacle and the commandment of distinguishing between clean and unclean. Elaborating on this latter point, God differentiates between the clean and unclean animals, identifying the animal species permissible for food and the ones forbidden for food. Land animals may be eaten only if they have split hooves and also chew their cud. Fish must have fins and scales. Birds of prey are not regarded as clean. The Torah offers several examples, and all bugs and creeping and crawling things are forbidden except for certain types of locusts. Thus the children of Israel are commanded to make a distinction between the unclean and the clean, and between the edible creature and the creature which is not to be eaten. Let's go a little bit deeper into Shemini. The word Shemini means 8, and it is the 26th reading from the Torah and 3rd reading from the book of Leviticus. Shemini comes from the first words of Exodus 9:1, which says, "Now it came about on the 8th day that Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel." Leviticus 9:1. The text goes on to describe the events of the 8th day after setting up the tabernacle, a phenomenal worship service followed by a tragic incident. The reading concludes with the biblical dietary laws regarding animals fit for consumption and prohibitions regarding those that are unfit. And let's talk about a phenomenal worship, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you had a great experience with. Have you ever attended a really powerful worship service? Have you ever felt like the music, the prayers, the preaching, and the presence of the Lord all combined together to make an amazing encounter with God? Sometimes a person might feel the presence of the Holy Spirit, be moved to tears or laughter, feel goosebumps on his arms and chills down his spine. But even the most powerful worship service experience pales in comparison to what the assembly of Israel experienced on the 8th day in the tabernacle. At the end of the book of Exodus, the Lord descended from Sinai and came to dwell in the tabernacle. The people beheld his presence enter the tabernacle as a cloud of glory. For the ensuing 7 days, Aaron and his sons underwent a ritual inauguration into the priesthood. 1 full week after the cloud of glory first entered the tabernacle, the new priests were ready to begin their service. On the 8th day of the first month, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar were ready to begin their duties. Anticipation was running high. Moses told Aaron and his sons, "Today the Lord will appear to you," Leviticus 9:4. He repeated the promise a few verses later as he issued instructions for the day's sacrificial service. He said, This is the thing which the Lord has commanded you to do, that the glory of the Lord may appear to you," Leviticus 9:6. He instructed Aaron to begin the sacrifices by offering a burnt offering and a sin offering for himself and a series of offerings for the whole assembly of Israel. Aaron and his sons dutifully performed the sacrificial services while the children of Israel crowded in around the tabernacle to watch. The new priests applied the blood and piled the sacrifices on the altar. When the sacrifices were finally completed, Aaron lifted his hands and blessed the children of Israel. Then he and Moses went into the tabernacle proper together. After they emerged, they blessed the people again. At that moment, the glory of the Lord appeared to all the people. Leviticus 9:23. The presence of God manifested in the tabernacle, not as a vague sort of warm, fuzzy spiritual feeling in the stomach, but as an actual, visible, manifest cloud that hovered above the tabernacle and as a consuming fire. The glory of the Lord is often compared to fire. On the day of the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, the glory of the Lord appeared as a fire on the mountain. To the eyes of the sons of Israel, the appearance of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the mountaintop. And that's in Exodus 24:17. So on the 8th day of the tabernacle, the same fire came from the presence of the Lord within the tabernacle. It blazed forth and consumed the sacrifices piled on the altar, representing that God had accepted the people's gifts. When the children of Israel saw the fire, they shouted and fell on their faces. Leviticus 9:23. The purpose of the tabernacle was fulfilled at that moment. God's desire to dwell among his people and their desire to draw near to him were joined in that moment of holy fire. As the sacrifices burst into flame on the altar, God and Israel met in a spiritual intimacy. Spiritual fire. Then fire came out from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of fat on the altar. And when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Leviticus 9:24. This first worship service demonstrates several principles that are applicable to any worship service, actually. First, we note that the priesthood and the children of Israel were not gathered for the purpose of receiving anything or being entertained. Instead, they were gathered to bring gifts to God and to worship him in the manner he had prescribed. Nevertheless, they did receive. They received blessings from Moses and Aaron, and most significantly, they had the privilege of a close encounter with God. Nowadays, when people attend worship services, they usually do so for the entertainment value of the music or the sermon. They expect to be provided with a spiritual experience or intellectual stimulation. When we gather together, we should do so for God's sake, not for our own. We should be desiring to bestow our gifts upon him and to serve him according to the careful instructions he had provided. The people in attendance should be concerned with blessing God. Like Aaron and Moses in the tabernacle, the leaders should be concerned with blessing the people. Most important, we should anticipate a close encounter with God. When we gather in his house of worship on his appointed times, it is reasonable to expect that he will be present in some manner and impact our lives. On the other hand, the fire of the Lord did not blaze forth in that manner on a daily basis. The priests continued to serve and bring the offering every day after that first miraculous worship service. They kept the divine fire alive by feeding the flames of the altar, but the amazing glory of the Lord did not blaze out again. There were probably some Israelites who felt as if something was amiss. Why has this tabernacle become so spiritually dry? They might have wondered. Perhaps they went looking for other tabernacles where God's Spirit was really moving. Some people are always looking for spiritual fire. They are in constant pursuit of emotional highs and phlegmatic dazzlement. They judge the quality of worship service and the sincerity of other worshippers by means of their own internal emotional barometer, and they equate the mundane and routine with spiritual lifelessness. Other people are more like the priests. They may have had experiences with spiritual fire, but they do not live their lives in a pursuit of experiences. Instead of demanding fresh fire from heaven every week, they are diligently keeping the spiritual flame alive as they go through the seemingly mundane routines of serving the Almighty according to His instructions. Sometimes there is a fresh fire, but the mature person of faith serves steadfastly in all the seasons. Which of the above two types of people would you prefer to be married to? Would you want the person who's always looking for romantic and sexual thrills, even to the point of abandoning the relationship if it feels dry at times? Or would you prefer the person who is willing to stay steadfastly committed in both good times and bad? Which kind of worshiper do you think God is seeking? The divine fire did appear again from time to time at the announcement of the birth of Samson in Judges 13, when Solomon dedicated the first temple in 2 Chronicles 7, and when Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18. The divine fire signified that both the sacrifice and the sacrificer had found favor in God's eyes. And in Acts 2, the flames of God's glory appeared among the believers, signifying the bestowal of the Holy Spirit upon them. It happened during the festival of Pentecost, while the people of Israel were worshiping in the temple and offering the prescribed festival sacrifices. We are still keeping the Pentecost flame alive today. And the sin of Aaron's sons. Let's talk about it because this is a very, very interesting story. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. Leviticus 10:1. After the appearance of the glory of the Lord in the tabernacle, it would be nice if Leviticus ended with the words, "and they lived happily ever after." But it doesn't, and they didn't. Two of the new priests did not live happily ever after all. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, offered a strange fire, 10:1, before the Lord and were themselves consumed by the fire of God. Their cousins came and carried their bodies out of the tabernacle while Moses warned their father and their brothers not to mourn while serving in the tabernacle. What was it that Nadab and Abihu did wrong? Over the years, I have encountered several explanations for the deaths of Nadab and Abihu from both Jewish and Christian sources. The wide diversity of opinions suggests that no one knows for sure. The Torah is ambiguous, simply stating that they offered strange fire before the Lord, Leviticus 10:1, which seems to imply that they brought the fire from some source other than the altar when they offered the incense. Now I have compiled here the top 10 list of things that traditional Jewish commentaries say Nadab and Abihu did to deserve getting torched in the tabernacle, and we'll go from number 10. Number 10 is chutzpah. The word chutzpah means impudence. According to one opinion, the real sin of Nadab and Abihu was impudent disrespect for their teacher Moses. When Moses was teaching Torah, Nadab and Abihu would contradict him with their own opinions and interpretations. This fatal flaw led to their fatal decision to offer incense according to their own interpretation of Torah rather than their teacher's instruction. Number 9 is called bad lunch. In Exodus 24, Moses, Aaron, and his sons ascended Mount Sinai where they saw God and they ate and drank. Exodus 24:11. One less than compelling explanation from Jewish tradition says that it was disrespectful for them to eat before God's divine presence. Therefore, God punished them with the death of Nadab and Abihu. This one, I'm not so sure that I'm leaning more towards. Number 8 would be more chutzpah. An old retelling of the story explains that Nadab and Abihu were once walking behind Moses and Aaron, and Nadab asked Abihu, "When will these two old men die so that we can become the leaders of Israel?" To punish them for such disrespectful chutzpah, God eliminated them. Number 7, drinking. Some commenters infer that Aaron's two elder sons were drunk when they transgressed. This interpretation is based on the prohibition given to Aaron a few verses later. Do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you when you came into the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. Leviticus 10:9. Like the other explanation, this is merely a guess, and there is no evidence that intoxication was involved. The Torah never mentioned that they were impaired. So personally, I'm leaning more towards this one. The story is that, at least in my opinion, even though they were under the influence of alcohol, out of all their love that they had for the Lord, they went and offered those incenses when they weren't supposed to because they were under the influence of alcohol. So at the same time, they did something wrong, but on the other hand, they did it out of their love for God, and that is exactly what it says, that His name has been sanctified through them. So personally, I'm thinking this was the reason. But we will go to number 6, which is called wrong place and right time. Some interpreters see Leviticus 16 as evidence that Nadab and Abihu entered the Holy of Holies to present their incense. Leviticus 16 opens by mentioning the deaths of Aaron's 2 sons, then proceeds to warn Aaron not to enter the Holy of Holies lest he die. Now this is also a very, very good reason. So this would be my number 2. Number 5, too charismatic. Other opinions have it that the only sin Nadab and Abihu committed was getting swept away with the religious ecstasy of the moment. They became so engaged in the emotional energy of worship service that they felt moved to introduce a little spontaneity and innovation into the tabernacle service. And it was not a good idea. Number 4 we got is bad assumptions. One opinion has it that the mistake of Nadab and Abihu was that they both assumed the other knew what he was doing. They did not consult each other or anyone else about the details of how to offer the incense. Instead, they just went along with each other, both thinking that the other knew how to do it correctly. Number 3 is called legalism. An unusual opinion says that the thing that cost Aaron's sons their lives was their foolish belief that they were righteous in God's eyes and did not need His attributes of mercy. They were so confined that they were performing the Torah correctly and they did not need grace. It turned out that they did need it. Number 2, they never married. When mentioning Nadab and Abihu, the Bible notes that they had no children. Numbers 3 and 4. And again it says they had no sons in 1 Chronicles 24:2. Based on these passages, the Jewish tradition speculates that Nadab and Abihu had both refused marriage because they felt that no woman could be found who would ever be worthy of them. This explanation sounds suspiciously like that of a parent exasperated over a son who keeps refusing potential matches. The lesson is clear. Lower your expectations and get married quickly, or God will smite you. And number 1, the strange fire. The safest and most biblically sound answer is that they offered strange fire before the Lord, Leviticus 10:1. As explained above, this implies that the coals they used in their fire pans came from some source other than the altar of the Lord. So what do you think? No, comment down below which reason what is your opinion of it? And we'll keep going with playing with fire. Fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord, Leviticus 10:2. Leviticus 9 ended with a fire coming out from the presence of the Lord and consuming the sacrifices on the altar. It was an auspicious sign, so to say it. The people shouted in ecstatic worship and prostrated themselves before God. Leviticus 10 opens with fire coming out from the presence of the Lord and consuming Nadab and Abihu. The juxtaposition of these two stories is supposed to teach us a lesson about God. In both stories, the fire came out from the presence of the Lord. In both stories, the fire represents God's glory. It is the same fire. It is the same God. To what can this matter be compared? 2 men were traveling through the woods on a cold night. They decided to build a fire. They soon began to feel warm, but the foolish one of the 2 said to himself, "If sitting by the fire makes me feel warm, how much warmer would I feel if I sat in the fire?" Now, I'm often shocked by the disrespect shown to God by brothers and sisters who seem to have no sense of propriety or sanctity. It is not uncommon to see God's Hebrew name written on hats and t-shirts as if he were a ball team or soft drink. It is all too common to hear people claiming prophecy on his behalf and speak in his name while blathering nonsense. All sorts of bizarre shenanigans are passed off on the people of God as manifestation of his spirit. I believe that Nadab and Abihu failed to respect the lines of holiness, and they crossed over too close to the fire. The writer of the book of Hebrews says our God is a consuming fire, and we can see that in Hebrews 12:29. For a believer to attain spiritual equilibrium, he must keep in mind both the love of God and the fear of God. While we must always remember that God is our gracious and loving Abba in heaven, we must also remember that he is a fearsome consuming fire. And that is the same example that we talked about before, comparing us to our Father in earth, like your real Father. We can say that we love our Father very much, but we are also scared to do something that will disappoint him. So it comes to the same with our Father in heaven. We love him so much, but we should always have a fear of him, which will lead us to do things as he told us to do, and by following his instructions and not our own. Safety regulations, so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean, and so as to teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them through Moses. Leviticus 10:10-11. The incident with Nadab and Abihu underscored the fact that it is dangerous having God dwell in your midst. It's not all praise and worship singing. Though we do not know the precise nature of their offense, we do know that Nadab and Abihu stepped outside of the rules that God had given to the priesthood. The result was disastrous. Suppose you heard about a horrible automobile accident in which 2 men were killed. On the further inquiry, you learned that the men were driving on the wrong side of the highway, with their headlights off when the accident occurred. Though you might feel sympathy for them, you would feel that they had brought about their own deaths by breaking the rules. The laws of the Torah are supposed to work in a similar manner. They are not just arbitrary laws that God has randomly and capriciously doled out. They also serve as a safety regulations to guard our relationship with Him. In a sense, they protect us from ourselves. In other sense, they protect us from violating God's holiness. And we'll talk about Aaron's grief. Why did you not eat the sin offering at the holy place? For it is the most holy, and he gave it to you to bear away the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord. Leviticus 10:17. Moses did not allow Aaron and his sons to mourn the death of Nadab and Abihu. As priests serving in the tabernacle on behalf of all Israel, they had to set aside their personal feelings for the duration of the shift. Mourning was not allowed in the tabernacle because the tabernacle represented God's dwelling place, where one day He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be any death. There will no longer be any mourning, or crying, or pain. And we can see that in Revelation 21:4. That's actually my favorite line in the scripture, because in my personal experience, it did happen to me when I personally saw Yeshua, and he did wipe away the tears from my eyes. But that's a personal story, so whoever wants to hear about it, feel free to message, and I shall gladly share it. But Aaron and his surviving sons had to stifle their personal pain and continue the service. It is difficult to imagine. Therapists encourage people to let their feelings out and to avoid bottling up emotions. This may be a good policy while in a therapist's office, but it is not a good way to conduct life. Of course, we should be honest about our feelings, but it is not always appropriate in every situation. A person who wears his heart on his sleeve is ultimately demonstrating selfishness. Because he feels pain, he wants others to feel it too. An angry person disregards the feelings of others as he gives vent to his emotions. A person in love forces himself on an unwilling target of his affection. It's not a proper way to behave. Aaron and his remaining sons held their grief in abeyance while they finished the day's sacrificial duties. Nevertheless, Aaron did not feel it was appropriate to eat the meat of the sin offering, while his heart was so heavy, so he had it burned. Moses rebuked him, but Aaron explained, "When things like these happen to me, if I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of the Lord?" Leviticus 10:19. The offering were to be eaten with rejoicing. Aaron was willing to do his duty in the tabernacle, but he was not willing to fake a spirit of religious joy before the Lord. And we'll come to kosher laws. Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, "These are the creatures which you may eat from all the animals that are on the earth." Leviticus 11:2. So Judaism is well known for its dietary laws. In the previous Torah reading, we learned that blood, fat, and unslaughtered meat are off the Torah menu. In Hebrew lingo, food permissible to eat is described as kosher, a word that means fit or proper. Leviticus 11 describes which animals the Torah deems fit and proper for Jews to eat and which it does not. The comments on the previous Torah portion observed that in the Gospels and Epistles, there seem to be passages that overturn the Old Testament's dietary regulations. We took note of Mark 7, where Yeshua declared all foods clean, Peter's visions of the sheet in Acts 10, Paul's statements from everything being permissible in 1 Corinthians 6:12, and his claim that nothing is unclean in Romans 14:14. Other passages could be cited as well. Now, as we have studied these passages in the past, we and many other people actually have come to believe that they have been fundamentally misunderstood and mistranslated. When read in context, almost all of them refer to debates within Judaism over the kosher status of otherwise permissible foods that might be considered defiled because they were handled with unwashed hands, prepared by Gentiles, sacrificed to idols, or tainted by idolatry. Unclean animals were not even regarded as food by Yeshua or the apostles, and they are never even discussed. That being said, it is important to remember that when the apostles issued dietary regulations for Gentile believers, they mentioned the prohibitions regarding blood, food sacrificed to idols, and the meat of unslaughtered animals. And so that's pretty much tells you that even Gentile believers, other nations, Christians, should be eating kosher foods, meaning the foods that God said that are allowed to be eaten, which are slaughtered properly and all the blood has been drained out and salted after, and which are fit for consumption. All those other passages that we read in the New Testament, that is not what it's meant, especially the passage with Yeshua saying that everything is clean, was specifically retaining to ritual cleanness, not that all meats are clean. There's many things we can learn from those passages, many deep explanations that pertain to original translation and what exactly he said, what he meant. But point is, every follower of God should be following his instructions. God was the same before as he is now and as he will be in the future. If he gave these laws and instructions, they do not change. What our Messiah Yeshua did, he just came to explain them better. So as we say, the Torah never changed with the arrival of Yeshua. He just gave us a better interpretation of it so people would understand and stop being just religious, but actually build a relationship with God. So we will talk about fit and unfit animals. Whatever divides a hoof, thus making a split hoofs, and choose the cud among the animals that you may eat. Leviticus 11:3. The teaching of Leviticus 11 is fairly clear and straightforward. It is not derived from man-made traditions. It comes directly from the mouth of the Lord. He gives the children of Israel a list of criteria for the type of animals they are permitted to eat, and a list describing the animals forbidden to them. The animal world is divided into 4 categories: land animals, sea creatures, fowl, and insects. Each category has its own criteria. Animals that are permissible for food are described as tahor. Animals that are forbidden are described as tameh. These terms are ordinarily translated as clean and unclean, respectively, but for the better clarity, we have been translating them as fit or unfit in our teaching. So this seems to make sense. After all, the typical horse is probably just as physically clean, if not cleaner, than the typical goat. But the horse is not kosher, while the goat is. The forbidden animals are not in any sense ritually contaminating or unfit so long as they're alive. It is only when they're dead, or more specifically, when they are eaten, that their unfit status becomes relevant. Now there is a chart that lists some of the main criteria of the Torah gives for determining if animal is fit for consumption. So for land animals, as we talked about before, must have divided cloven hooves and must ruminate, chew its cud. Fish must have both fins and scales. Birds, no common criteria, but must not be a bird of prey. And insects must have jointed legs above the outer legs, must not creep on the ground. The only permissible criteria for insects is grasshoppers, but even now people don't really eat them because we don't know exactly which kind of grasshoppers is allowed. So people avoid insects, period. And to talk about more reasons, a lot of people say that, God forbade us from eating these certain unclean things for our health benefits. For example, there's a recent study where people who eat a lot of pork have a more chance of getting cancer than people who smoke cigarettes. So that is a big explanation that's going around. And as much as there is a little bit of truth in it, the main reason for God giving us those instructions is actually for our spirituality and not our physicality. Of course, he also has some physical truth. But the main explanation is when we eat those things that are prohibited to us, we are pushing ourselves away from God. As in a way, when you have a father, he tells you not to do something, you do something, and that kind of pushes that relationship apart. And the more you do it, the more the relationship puts you both apart. But the other reason is it actually takes away some of our spiritual connection to God. So I know many people who have eaten prohibited meats before, and once they became, as we should call it, kosher, and started following the proper meats, they could feel, and most of them gave many testimonies, so how much more they felt of that spiritual connection, closeness with God. So it has improved dramatically, where people who have ate bad animals, that connection slowly just breaks down and you can feel God less and less. So that's just one thing for you to think about. And believe me, it does matter a lot what you eat and that you live according to God's instructions. We'll talk about reasons. Whatever in the water does not have fins and scales, it is abhorrent to you. Leviticus 11:12. So why does God say that some animals are fit while others are unfit? We'll talk about it educationally. Many books have been written discussing the subject, and various commentators have struggled to find the common rationale. One popular theory is that the prohibited types of animals are better for our bodies, as that's exactly what we talked about. The unfit animals tend to be scavengers, and perhaps their meats carry more toxins and other harmful elements, like pig. So surely God in his wisdom knew what foods would be good for his people and what foods would be harmful for them. But there is more to it than simply good health. So the kosher laws are not God's version of holistic health food. Previously, we have learned that someone ritually fit is allowed to enter the tabernacle and eat the sacrifices, while a ritually unfit person is not. The laws of what is fit and what is unfit have to do with being able to participate in a tabernacle worship system. So that also matters a lot. Things that make a person unfit include death, leprosy, mildew, and human mortality. God desires his people to be a kingdom of priests, and that requires implementing ritual concern in daily life. However, these are just guesses. We really do not know the reason some animals are called fit or others are not. The rabbis explain that the kosher laws belong to the category of the commandment that has no rational explanation, hukim. So as much as we do know that it's beneficial for you to eat kosher animals, which brings your connection closer to God, we can't give a full-out explanation, like scientifically, on it, or educational. Like it does not, there is no rational explanation. Asking why a buffalo is kosher while a giant sloth is not is like asking why the Sabbath is on the 7th day of the week and not on the 1st day of the week, or why the sun rises in the east instead of the west. Some things we have to accept simply because God says so. Who are we to question him, right? He decided that certain creatures are not food for his people. That is completely within his prerogative. Though we may not be able to deduce why God designated some animals as fit and others are unfit, we do know why he imposed the dietary laws on the people. The Torah tells us that this is a matter of holiness. You shall not make yourselves unclean with them so that you become unclean. For I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourself therefore and be holy, for I am holy. And you shall not make yourselves unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on earth. For I am the Lord who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. Thus you shall be holy, for I am holy. And that's in Leviticus 11:43 through 45. So God gave the Jewish people the dietary laws to make them holy. Remember, the word holy does not refer to a moral, ethical quality. It seems to be set apart. Israel is supposed to demonstrate to the world that it is a nation set apart for the Lord. One of the ways that the people of Israel are to do that is by maintaining a distinctive diet. On some levels, and keeps them separated from others. The distinctive requirements of the kosher diet have forced the Jewish people to cluster together in communities, while limiting their potential interactions with other communities. So some people regard the thought of eating an unclean animal as revolting. Personal taste preferences and appetites are the wrong reasons for avoiding unfit foods. Likewise, health reasons alone are not a good motivation for keeping kosher. A famous rabbi from the days just before the time of the apostles taught that a person should not say, "I think pork is disgusting." Instead, he should say, "I would certainly eat it, but my Father in heaven has forbidden me to eat of it, so I will not." And that is the greatest example that any of us should learn from. Even though we want to do things our way, and some things look good, some things taste good, but we should always remember what our Father in heaven told us. If we obey God only when it makes good sense to us, or when we happen to have similar inclination, that is not really obedience. This can be compared to a child whose father insisted on the 8 o'clock bedtime. On the first night, the child felt drowsy around 7:30, so he obeyed his father. "How wise my father is to send me to bed at 8, the child thought. The next night, however, he did not feel tired. He could think of no rational reason for going to bed so early. The 8 o'clock bedtime mandate seemed arbitrary and unnecessary, so he chose to ignore it. It is not obedience if we only obey when it suits us to do so. Who should eat kosher? And that's something that we really touched bases on, but we'll talk about it more. For I am the Lord your God. Concentrate yourselves therefore, and be holy, for I am holy, and you shall not make yourself unclean with any of the swarming things that swarm on the earth. Leviticus 11:44. To whom do the biblical dietary laws apply? The Torah clearly indicates that God intended the dietary laws to set Israel apart from the other nations. So at minimum, these laws apply to the Jewish people. But do they also apply to Gentile believers? After all, Gentile believers are called fellow heirs with Israel, wild branches, grafted to the olive tree, members of the greater commonwealth of Israel, spiritual sons and daughters of Abraham. Should Gentiles be required to eat according to the biblical dietary laws too? And the answer is yes. It is not worthwhile for us to speak in terms of should or must or have to when discussing how laws intended specifically for Jewish people might have application for Gentiles. As we have noted, the apostles laid out the minimum should, must, and have to for Gentile believers. And that we can find in Acts 15, which is a very, very important passage. So if you guys want to take a look at Acts 15 and read it, where they forbade them from blood, meat sacrificed to idols, and meat of strangled animals. So what is the meat of strangled animals that has been forbidden to Gentiles? Strangled animal, it means it's an animal that has been killed in a non-kosher way, by strangulation or some other, non-kosher slaughtering, which, the animal basically chokes and then it dies. And so that's one point. And then you're also forbade from eating blood. Like nobody actually takes, a cup of blood and drinks it. No, it means blood in the actual meat that you eat. It must be blood-free. So when the animal is kosherly killed, most of the blood is then drained, and then after they have 72 hours of wash the meat, soak it for 30 minutes, and then salt it for 1 hour, and then they wash it 2 more times. And after that, they sell it in the stores. So that extra salting takes care of the remaining parts of the blood. So the apostles offered those standards as a minimum threshold of the dietary law, not a maximum. Right? So the Didache itself in late 1st century of manual, Didache is like a manual of instructions for Gentile believers, and that scholars believe originated with the Jewish believers. So it encourages the Gentiles to take on as much of the dietary laws as they are able. And it says this, concerning food regulations, bear what you're able, but against that which is sacrificed to idols, be exceedingly on thy ground, for it is the service of dead gods. Didache 6:3. So people adopt all sorts of personal dietary preferences and restrictions. Vegetarians, vegans, gluten-free, and so forth. Why shouldn't Gentile disciples be allowed to adopt a biblically based diet? Ask yourself that. And believe me, when I tell you, it will bring you so much closer to God. The kosher diet. This is the law regarding the animal and the bird and every living thing that moves in the waters and everything that swarms on the earth. Leviticus 11:46. So there are several passages in the New Testament that could be interpreted in antithesis to the dietary laws of Leviticus 11. Based on their understanding of these passages, many brothers and sisters in the faith believe that the biblical dietary laws are absolute, and that observing them would be a step toward legalism and bondage to the law. A person who decides to adopt the dietary laws should not quarrel with those who hold a different opinion on the matter. The person who decides to keep kosher needs to vigilantly guard his heart from looking down on the other believers who do not share his conviction. It is all too easy to fall into the trap of spiritual pride. Paul says, food will not commend us to God. We are neither the worse if we do not eat, nor the better if we do eat. 1 Corinthians 8:8. So if we want other people to respect our convictions and even try our best to open their eyes to some of the truth, we need to respect theirs as well. Nevertheless, we certainly can argue against the idea that keeping the biblical dietary laws places us under the legalistic bondage. Legalism is the idea that one must keep the commandments to earn salvation. Obeying the commandments of God out of a heart of willing submission is not legalism. If it were, one could argue against keeping any of the commandments of the Torah. Jewish disciples should never let the misinterpretations of Gentile Christianity dissuade them from their biblical obligations. However, before anyone gets too dogmatic about dietary laws, a few caveats need to be mentioned. We should point out that food cannot be deemed kosher merely on the basis of whether it meets the criteria of Leviticus 11. There's a lot more to it than that. For example, Jewish dietary standards separate meat and dairy. Certain foods must be made with Jewish supervision. Food cooked on the Sabbath is not considered kosher. Various ingredients, combinations, and methods of production often disqualify a thing one might presume to be permitted. Insects often disqualify vegetables and leafy greens. Then there are the laws regarding the status of dishes, pots, pans, ovens, and other utensils. Judaism's complex and detailed laws, interpretations, and legal rulings about food are based on the Torah's various dietary rules scattered throughout the text. So the practical application of those rules goes beyond a simple surface reading. Suffice it to say, just because something qualifies as biblically clean by the rules of Leviticus 11 does not mean it's kosher by the standard Jewish law. So the least that a Gentile person should do is just eat kosher meats and other kosher things that God has permitted. All the other kosher practices of kosher kitchen in Judaism is something that, if they feel they want to take on, they're more than welcome to. But the least minimum should be eating something that God permitted everybody to eat and abstain from the non-kosher animals. And it's completely natural for a Gentile believer to adopt a biblical clean diet as prescribed in Leviticus 11. So in my opinion, the apostolic prohibitions of Acts 15 place the Gentile disciple on a trajectory toward the biblical diet as a matter of holiness. To me, it seems like a servant of the king of the Jews would eat from the palace kitchen. Likewise, one destined to take a seat at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the coming messianic banquet of the future kingdom will be constrained to choose from the selections listed on the menu. And that's about it for today's. Lots of stuff about kosher animals, so hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. If this message blessed you, please like the video and subscribe. It does help a lot for the message to reach more people who need encouragement and truth. And feel free to follow our Instagram, linked in the comments for daily inspiration. May God bless you and keep you. May He shine His light on you and be gracious to you. May He turn towards you and grant you peace. Grace and shalom to you all.